Hello, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on SI and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. And we're looking now at the Raiders through the lens of the bye week. Now, there are several things of which you want to remember as you're literally making your way through a bye week. This is an opportunity for teams in the NFL to get healthy, as well as take a thorough stock in where they're at. The Raiders are 2-5 by almost any and all metrics. This team is worse than they were last year. And so you have to begin to ask yourself some deep questions about the state of the franchise, the direction of the franchise, and you have to start asking yourself some questions about immediacy and repair or long term. We're going to get into all of that today in our bye week analysis of the Raiders. First of all, people around the team and outside the team have made it very emphatically clear that Mark Davis is not considering the termination of a Pete Carroll. And I'm going to make this point very clear. I know it will not be popular, but my job is not to be popular with you. My job is to give you my belief and analysis. The entirety of the time that I have been covering the Las Vegas Raiders, the one consistent has been inconsistency. It's firing everybody and everything stays the same. Pete Carroll, you're not going to get anyone better than him. And for people that say, well, Pete has forgotten how to coach or the game's passed him by, that's ridiculously ignorant. And so to me, I think this is smart of Mark Davis. I think it's very smart of Mark Davis. You've got to give this an opportunity. Now, I talked about doing analysis and sitting down with your brain trust and analyzing everything. And I certainly think that needs to happen. But I think it is smart that they've made the decision. They're not making any changes with Pete. They believe in Pete, and they're going to do that. Now, I am going to get to this in a minute. I think they have to help Pete, and I'll talk to you more about that in a couple of minutes. Now, if you know you're going to keep your coach and you're going to continue moving forward, then one of the things I talked about is you have to sit down and look at. In today's modern NFL, you get about 2 years to turn a team around. That is the legitimate time that a lot of people give their teams. And I think that you have a right to expect it. I had someone I deeply respect, and I don't remember who it was, recently say something to me. They said, Hondo, you talk about give coaches 21 games. But if you were to switch jobs and leave SI and go to ESPN, it doesn't mean that you would have 2 years to do your job and show improvement. And they're right there. But then you have to ask yourself, if we are looking at a 2 year to get back to um, consistent relevancy and in the playoffs, then you have to ask yourself, okay, who will be here in 2 years? Who is going to be? So let's just use Maxx Crosby right up front, who the Raiders are not shopping. Teams are calling, multiple teams are. But the Raiders are not shopping Max. They don't want to get rid of Max. Why? He's still young. He is still in the prime of his career. And so in 2 years, they expect him to be, which when I say 2 years, I'm referring to the season of 27, to absolutely be a relevant factor there. So you don't want to get rid of that. So that is a big deal. You're going to keep with Pete. You're going to stick with Max. And quite frankly, Max is bigger than anyone in the franchise. Max is more popular with the fans than Mark Davis. Mark is more popular with the fans than Tom Brady. Mark is more popular with the fans than John Smitek, Pete Carroll, or anyone associated with the organization. There is nobody. And Max is one of those few players who is bigger than the team. That says a lot. That says an absolute lot. There are very few players in the National Football League. Matthew Stafford, great quarterback, Hall of Fame quarterback. He's not bigger than the Rams. Not close. I think Jaden Daniels is a great young quarterback, not bigger than the Commanders. I think really the only other player, and I'm trying to be as fair on this as I can, the only other player in the league who's bigger than his team is probably Patrick Mahomes. Probably. So when you understand that you have a Maxx Crosby and he's beloved by your fans, and he's everything that you want. Maxx Crosby is a model person on the field, off the field, in every single way. Maxx Crosby does things the right way. That is what you want. It's what you crave. It's what you desire. I think this is a smart decision by the Raiders. Someone said, well, what do you think they could get? I think they could get, depending on the team, how high you project them to be going. I think you could go anywhere from 2 to maybe 3 first-round picks. 2 firsts and a second. But I think you could get as many as 3. I was told by someone who I respect, if you're a team that is like, look at the Detroit Lions. If you're a team that you know there's some guys coming up you're going to have to pay, and first round draft picks cost a lot of money, you may even go, and I'm not saying they would, I'm using them as an example. You may say, okay, I'm willing to give away 3 first round draft picks because then I don't have to budget them into my salary cap, and it gives me more room to pay some other guys because I don't have to worry about first round picks. That's only an example. So I think that is a big deal of where the Raiders sit and where the Raiders stand today. Now, the third thing is you're going to have to help Pete Carroll. And I don't mean help Pete Carroll like Pete Carroll can't do the job. But here is the thing that you need to know about Pete Carroll. He is a guy that likes to run his quarterback under center. He loves play action pass. He loves play action pass. He wants to go out there and utilize that, play tough defense. That is Pete's MO. It's when Pete has been his very best, whether it was in Seattle or at USC, that is what he's done. Pete has come out and said he wanted more Jack Bech. He wanted to see the football run more, all of those things publicly, and not saying, gee, I'm mad at Chip, and I'm not implying that he is, but I'm unhappy with my offense, and this is what I want. Now, stick with me for a moment. Last week, when they went up to Kansas City, the weakness of the Kansas City Chiefs, who I believe right now is playing the best football, and I think is in the top 3 of the best teams right now in the NFL, their weakness was running the football. The Raiders were down their best receiver in Jakobi Meyers and their best tight end, arguably their best offensive player, and Brock Bowers. And so they came out in the first quarter, when the game is either tied because it just got started, or after your first drive you're down 7, and they ran. I mean, they threw the ball 80% of the time. That's unfathomable. That doesn't make sense in any world that you live that's football related. It doesn't matter if it's Pee-wee football with a bunch of 4th graders playing flag up to the NFL. That is nonsensical. Period. There's no other way to cut the mustard on that. And so after the game, when I asked Pete, and Pete talked about, that was the game plan. Well, if it's the game plan, then your offensive coordinator needs to be reminded of it. And he's not been afraid to be critical of the offense. And I don't think he's afraid now. And so Pete needs to go in and have a head-to-head meeting. In the business world, they'd say a come to Jesus meeting with Chip Kelly saying, I'm the head coach. I know you're paid $6 million large a year, the highest paid offensive coordinator in the NFL. This is not what I want, and this is what you're going to do. Now, if there's any resistance to that above Pete Carroll's head, and I'm not saying that there is, then Pete needs to make that clear. Yeah, this is not what I want, but there are Chip's doing the bidding of others. I don't think that's what's going on. I'm not saying that. I'm not implying that. But I'm just saying, someone asked me, well, but what if he keeps doing it? Then Pete has to come out and either say, I'm going to take over play calling. Shannon and I were talking, I think it was Monday, may have been Tuesday. We were talking to a very successful NFL coach. And I said to him, it doesn't make sense. Pete's saying this is what he wants, but this is what they're doing. He said, then I think Pete should script 10 plays, 15 plays, however many. And then try them and go after them, see what's working and do it that way. He said, this is what this particular coach said to Shannon and I. He goes, if there's a problem and Chip's not doing what Pete wants, then fine. Tell him you're the offensive coordinator. Come up with the plan, but let Joe Philbin call the plays. I am not advocating for any of that. I'm telling you what I was told. I think nobody should be advocating. Let Pete Carroll run the program. Let Pete Carroll do what Pete Carroll does. And the Raiders need to make it very clear. You may remember back during the offseason, I did a series of reasons why there should be optimism with the Raiders. And one of the things I talked about was a congruent plan, everybody being on the same page. I think it needs to come down very clear. Pete is driving this train. I think Pete needs to sit down with John Spytek. They need to go over and talk about personnel. They need to look at every other option. Who can we go sign off of other people's practice squad? Who can we trade that isn't going to be here in 2 years? Who? And I think you want John and Pete, and I'm not advocating for John either to get fired. I don't think that's the answer. I'm sorry. We've seen enough people get fired with the Raiders that it's very clear firing people's not the answer. And you know that the only successful franchises are the ones that operate in consistency. So what I would say to you is this. You make it very clear. Pete handles the on-field product. Pete makes it clear to John what he needs. John goes out and does the evaluating and goes and gets him the player that meets that needs. But to me, there better not be any sacred cows. Anybody on Pete's staff should be solely and 100% committed to Pete Carroll. And the franchise is winning. But when I say committed, meaning under his authority, I'm not saying there isn't. I'm just saying make sure that's clear. And Pete needs to lay down the law saying, hey, you're the offensive coordinator. I want your offensive brain. This is what I want. Go do what you do within those parameters. Within those parameters. Make it very abundantly clear. This is what I expect. But when you're going against a team as good as the Chiefs, where you know there is a very good chance they're getting all their players back, they are fired up, they are ready to go, they are through the roof excited. You know they're playing their best football. You either are ignoring the tape because you think you're smarter than the tape, or it's malfeasance to not go and do what they struggle with. This isn't brain surgery. The NFL, the National Football League, is a tremendous league. It is a violent league. Football is a very difficult sport. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's hard to wrap your mind around. It's tackling, it's turnovers. The game itself is very difficult to perform, but very simple to plan. And the Raiders have got to get on one page. There can't be any more press conferences of, I want to see this guy. Where's he at? Or I need to do this. Or this was the game plan, but we got out of it. No, you didn't get out of it because you came out in the first quarter when it was not out of hand and 80% of it was throwing. Now, if that's the case, if that's what you want to do, you come out and say, you know what? We thought because we were down 2 guys that we felt like it was going to get out of hand quick. So we just decided to go to the air. Okay, that's fine. In fact, I saw a clip of Derek and I think it was David Carr doing a podcast talking about that's kind of what they thought. Hey, come out and just throw the ball immediately and try to outscore the Chiefs. And if that's the case, say that, but not no, the game plan was to do the other. Well, you didn't do it. So when you don't, it looks like there's some incongruity. That's the appearance. And so you got to get that on one page. You have to get it on one page. And they got to come out. Let me just tell you this. Raider Nation, loves the deep ball. It's part of their DNA. It is how Al Davis built this franchise. But you want to know what is, that may be part of their DNA, but do you know what they just crave? Just win, baby. The Raiders don't have the offensive line to drop back with big drops, even out of the gun, and compete with Kansas City when you're down Brock Bowers and, oh, by the way, Jakobi Meyers. And then if you want to run the football, get Geno out of the gun where he's not had his most success. And I need you to listen. My favorite offense is a quarterback under center with play action. I love that. I love the running of the football. I love the balance. I love the usage of the tight end. I like the deep shots. I love all of that. To me, that's the best offense. But to me, you got to be married to winning. So if you're like, gee, we really want to keep Geno, we really want to keep our quarterback in the gun, then why did you go sign Geno? Why? Why? There were other quarterbacks. There were others. I mean, remember, this team had a shot at Sam Darnold, Joe Flacco. Remember when Baker Mayfield came in and had a cup of coffee and a donut and beat the Raiders for the Rams? He was out there a couple of years ago, and John Spytek and the Buccaneers liked him. There have been plenty. The Raiders have had a ton of quarterbacks. The problem is, it doesn't matter who they brought in. You have to call something that works to their style. Let's look at another example, okay? Aaron Rodgers is doing a really good job with the Pittsburgh Steelers. A very good job. So is Jared Goff with the Detroit Lions. Jared Goff would not be doing good on the Chiefs. He doesn't fit their system. Neither does Aaron Rodgers. You've got to put people in position to succeed. If there's one thing that has to come out of this bye week, the Raiders have to do an autopsy on what killed their season. Now, I'm going to make a comment that nobody's going to want to hear, but it's fair. They're a screwed up field goal attempt away from sitting here today at 3-4. You may say, well, that's still a losing record. I agree. Doesn't seem as deep as 2-5. But the reality is you are. And your team just had your worst performance in a long time. You were embarrassed on Monday Night Football. I mean, on the football game on Sunday. It wasn't Monday night. I apologize. You were just embarrassed. So now you have to absolutely go through and look at, what are we going to do? Now, I've had a lot of people email about getting young players reps. I agree with that. To me, I think you have to turn your focus. I don't think you give up on the year, because you can't tell your players to quit, because then you don't have a right to ask them to come back. And on top of it, they're not going to quit because some of them are playing. There's a lot of players that aren't under contract for next year, and they're playing to put on film what they want their next team to see from them. So you can't ask them to quit. Nor would it be moral to do. But that's tanking. That's when you quit on purpose. But it's not tanking to go say, okay, have a seat. We're going to play some older players. I mean, some younger players. We're going to get some younger guys reps. Okay. So let's use Charles Grant for a minute. The rookie, who a lot of people think has the tools to be a really good player. I am one of those people. I think he could really turn out to be special. And you know, I feel that way about Caleb Rogers, the youngster. Both young men, Grant even more than Rogers, but especially Grant, but even Rogers, were not ready to compete at this level. Certainly could not have put them on their practice squads. They would have been signed to somebody's 53. And rightfully so, by the way. But then you have to start asking yourself, okay, are they at a place where if they play, it will damage them? Could the beating just be so severe that they don't recover? I don't know the answer to that. That is when Pete's got to sit down with Brennan and Joe Philbin and make that decision. But every young player that getting blown up is not going to destroy them. I think you have to give a look. You have to give a look. You absolutely positively have to give a look. You have to get reps so that they're making their mistakes now in a season. So I'm going to say this to you. You lost 31-0. If I'm sitting there and I think, okay, Charles Grant isn't ready, but I'm bringing him in for a quarter and a half, and I'm not, I mean, these are things I'm saying looking forward. And then you ask yourself and you say to yourself, okay, this player, this game's out of hand. We're going to get them reps. We got to get them reps. And this is where the franchise has to make decisions now, not tanking, but certainly, okay, if we lose, we improve our draft status, but we're going to fight to win, but we're also going to fight for the future. Give that. Now, I was asked by someone, you know, what do I think about the Raiders? What should they say to the fans? I think they need to just be real clear to the fans. Hey, this is what we think. This is where we're going. We understand. We thought we were farther along than we were. We're not. I told you all along, I didn't think this was a playoff team. I didn't think they had the depth, and they're proving it. This is why I told you before the season. I expected them to beat the Patriots because they were going to be at their healthiest, number one. Number two, the Josh McDaniels system is very difficult, and young quarterbacks struggle with that a little bit early. I also told you if they played New England in November, I thought New England would win. And you see why. And remember Josh McDaniels that everyone wanted fired, who is a very good offensive coordinator, not a good head coach, but look how good he's doing right now. I'm hearing his name among some people for coordinator of the year. And how good the Patriots are playing right now on offense. So it's not like people have forgotten how to coach. But this franchise needs to absolutely and just get its head on straight and get in one direction. If you don't want a head coach that steers the ship, okay, then get a coach that allows whoever wants to steer it to steer it. But you're not going to go find a better one than Pete Carroll. And the Raiders are locked in. And one thing about Mark Davis has proven. I'm not afraid to make a clean cut. But they've got to get on one page, one direction. I'm going to say this to you. The special teams has been bad at times. We all know that. That's not an exaggeration. The defense has looked better than it's looked worse, but it has looked terrible. Look up at Kansas City last week at times also. But the biggest consistent question and issue on this football team, without hesitation, has been the offense. If this offense had even been remotely decent, I'm not even saying good. I think for sure you're sitting here 3-4, maybe even 4-3. If you look at the Chargers, they should have beat the Chargers. But it was just terrible play. I said after the time, the Raiders beat themselves, the Chargers didn't beat them. This is where they have to get on this now. And nobody can do it but them. But Pete's got bosses and everybody has bosses. Now the Raiders got to get on the right page moving forward.